Welcome. You are here now, and that is all that matters. There is nothing else required of you tonight. Nothing waiting, nothing pressing, nothing that cannot wait until morning. You have arrived at the end of the day, and the end of the day is a soft and generous place, a place that asks nothing of you except that you rest. So let yourself rest now. Let your body settle into wherever you are lying. Feel the surface beneath you accepting your weight completely, holding you without effort, without asking anything in return. Take a moment to notice your body. Notice the weight of your legs, how they press down into the surface beneath them with a pleasant, even heaviness. Notice your arms, resting at your sides or across your chest, heavy and still. Notice your shoulders, and let them drop just a little, just that last small amount that they sometimes hold without you realizing. And notice your face, the muscles around your eyes, the small tension that sometimes lives in the jaw, and let all that go easily, without forcing anything, simply allowing it to release the way a hand releases something it's been holding for too long. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a man who lived a very quiet life in a very quiet place a long, long time ago. His name was Thomas, and he was a lighthouse keeper, and he lived alone in a lighthouse on a low rocky point on the coast of England in the year 1820. His days were slow and his nights were slow, and his whole life had a rhythm to it like the rhythm of the sea itself. Steady, repetitive, deeply unhurried, and full of the kind of peace that only comes from doing the same necessary things in the same careful way, day after day, season after season, year after year. There is nothing alarming in this story. There is no danger. There is no drama. There is only the lighthouse and the sea and the slow turning of the light and the small, ordinary tasks of a man living his quiet life at the edge of the water. You do not need to follow every word. You do not need to remember anything. Simply let the story move past you, the way the tide moves past the rocks, slowly, gently, with no particular agenda, going nowhere in a hurry, simply moving as it has always moved and will always move. Let your eyes close now, if they have not already. Let your breathing find its own pace, not a forced pace, not a deep, deliberate breath, just a natural, easy rhythm of breathing that your body already knows how to do without any help from you at all. In and out, slow and even, the same breath you've been breathing your whole life, simply continuing now, as it always does, as it always will. We are going to step into Thomas's world now. A world of gray stone and gray sea and the smell of salt and lamp oil and cold air. A world where the most exciting thing that happens on any given day is the lighting of the lamp at dusk, and the most pressing task is the careful trimming of the wick, and the greatest comfort is a mug of warm tea held in both hands beside a small iron stove. A world that is very far away from anything complicated, and very close to something simple and good and deeply restful. Before we go there, take one more slow breath. Breathe in gently through your nose, feeling your chest and your belly rise just slightly, and breathe out long and easy through your mouth, letting everything go with that breath. Every thought you were carrying, every small worry, every unfinished thing. Just breathe it all out slowly and let it go, and let the next breath come in clean and easy, and let the next one out even more slowly than the last. Your body is heavy now. Your body knows it is time to rest, and it is already doing what bodies do at the end of a long day, releasing, settling, growing quiet. Your legs are heavy. Your arms are heavy. The back of your head is heavy against whatever it rests on, pressing down softly, completely supported. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to do. There is only this voice and the soft darkness behind your closed eyes and the slow, easy rhythm of your breathing and the story that is waiting for you just ahead in the pale gray light of an early morning in 1820 on a rocky point on the coast of England where a lighthouse stands in the mist and a man named Thomas is just beginning to wake. The lighthouse stands on a low headland that juts out into sea like a long, slow exhalation of the land itself, a gradual narrowing of the rocky coast that ends in a blunt point perhaps 30 feet above the water at high tide. The rock here is a dark gray blue, almost black when wet, smooth in places from centuries of water and weather, rough and broken in others where the stone has fractured along old lines and left edges that catch the light in a particular way, pale and sharp against the darker surfaces. The lighthouse itself is not a tall lighthouse. It is perhaps 60 feet from the base to the top of the lantern room, a solid, tapering cylinder of gray stone blocks. Each block cut and fitted with great care into the ones beside it, the joints between them filled with lime mortar that has gone gray with age and weathered smooth on its surface. The walls are very thick at the base, thick enough that the doorway is a small tunnel, perhaps 3 feet deep, before it opens into the interior. The door itself is of heavy dark wood, iron-banded, set into an iron frame, with a latch that requires a firm, deliberate press of the thumb to release. Around the base of the lighthouse, very close to the stone walls on 2 sides, there's a small collection of low outbuildings, a fuel store, a tool store, and a small stable with 1 horse, all of them built of the same dark stone, all of them low and practical and entirely without decoration of any kind. There is a kitchen garden on the landward side, enclosed by a low stone wall, the beds dark and dormant now in the November cold, with only a few tough plants still standing, a row of leathery kale, some stiff brown stalks of something that grew in summer and has not yet been cleared away. The sea is visible from every side of the headland and from the upper rooms of the lighthouse. The sea is everything, a vast, shifting gray-green expanse that extends in every direction until it meets the sky, which is also gray, also shifting, also vast. On calm days, the sea is almost flat, its surface a slow, oily movement of long, low swells that rise and fall with the deep, patient breathing of something enormously old and entirely indifferent. On rougher days, the swells are larger, and the white water shows at their crests, and the sound of the sea against the rocks below is a constant, rhythmic, deep and slightly hollow sound that fills the whole headland and enters the stone walls of the lighthouse, and can be felt as much as heard, a low vibration in the floor and the walls, in the air itself. But today, the day we are entering, is a calm day, a November morning, overcast and still, with a low gray sky that sits close over the water and makes the horizon difficult to find, the sea and the sky bleeding into each other at their meeting point in a soft, indistinct gray. There is no wind this morning, or almost none, just the faintest movement of cold, salt air from the south, barely enough to stir the dry stalks in the kitchen garden, barely enough to feel on the face as anything more than a slight difference in temperature from one moment to the next. The lighthouse lamp has been burning all night, as it always has, as it always will. It turns slowly in the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse, a slow, steady rotation, one complete turn every 30 seconds, the beam sweeping out across the gray water in its long, patient arc. The mechanism that turns a lamp is driven by a set of weights that descend to the center of the lighthouse on a chain, and every few hours Thomas must win the weights back up to the top, which he does by turning a large iron handle set into the wall of the watchroom, just below the lantern room. The turning of the handle requires effort, but it is a steady, rhythmic effort. Turn, 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 and the weights rise slowly and the mechanism is recharged and the lamp continues its slow rotation, and Thomas descends the stairs to his quarters and the night continues. It is nearly morning now. The lamp has been burning for 10 hours. Thomas is awake in his small bedroom on the 2nd floor of the lighthouse, a room that is simply a section of the circular interior of the tower, curved on one side where the outer wall curves, flat on the other where an interior partition divides the space from the stairwell. The room contains a narrow bed, a wooden chest, a small iron stove, and a single window that faces east, though this morning the east is not distinguishable from any other direction. It is all the same soft gray dark of the hour just before dawn. Thomas lies still for a moment after waking, the way he always does, not because he needs to, but because the moment of lying still before the day begins is a moment he values, a moment that belongs entirely to itself and to no particular task or purpose. He is a man of perhaps 50, lean and weathered, with large quiet hands and a face that has been shaped by years of salt air and gray light into something that is not exactly old, but is entirely settled, a face that has arrived at itself and is no longer going anywhere. He lies on his back. The blanket over him is heavy wool, dark gray, slightly rough to the touch but warm, very warm, and he is aware of its weight across his chest and legs, the particular comfort of that weight, which is a comfort he has known every winter morning for many years. The stove in the corner of his room has burned down through the night to a low, steady warmth, not hot, but warm enough that the room is only gently cool rather than sharply cold, the air carrying just the faintest bite of November. He listens. The sea is there, as it always is, that low, patient, rhythmic sound from below the headland, the slow push and pull of the water against the rock. It is a sound Thomas no longer hears in the way a new sound is heard. It has long since become part of the silence, part of the background against which all other sounds occur. He hears it the way you hear your own heartbeat when you are very still, present, real, but not demanding any attention, simply there, simply continuing. From above him, through the thick ceiling in the stairwell, he can hear the very faint sound of the lamp mechanism, a low, barely audible ticking, the sound of the gear train turning, one small measured sound for every small measured increment of the rotation. It is a sound so familiar, so steady, so completely reliable, that the absence of it would wake Thomas from the deepest sleep instantly, because the absence of it would mean something had stopped that must never stop. But the sound is there. It is always there, and its presence is as reassuring as anything Thomas knows. He turns his head slightly and looks at the window. The glass is cold and slightly foggy with condensation around its edges, and through it the sky is visible, a very dark gray, the darkness of the sky just beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly in the east. Dawn is coming. It is still perhaps 30 minutes away or 40, but it is coming, and Thomas can feel it approach the way he has learned to feel it. Not by seeing it exactly, but by a slight change in the quality of the dark outside the window, a loosening, a thinning of the deepest night into something that is preparing to become morning. He rises slowly. He sits on the edge of the bed for a moment, his feet finding the floor, bare wood, cool and slightly rough, and he sits there in a way he always sits for this first moment, his hands on his knees, breathing once, looking at nothing in particular, simply arriving at the day. Then he stands, and the floorboards make the small sound they always make under his weight, a soft creak, very low, more of a feeling than a sound, and he crosses the few steps to the stove. The stove is a small cast iron box on 4 short legs, with a hinge door on the front and a flue pipe that rises through the ceiling. The fire in it has burned low in the night, and when Thomas opens the small door and looks inside, he sees what he expected. A bed of pale ash with a few orange coals still glowing at its center, steady and patient, waiting. He reaches for the small iron poker hanging on its hook beside the stove and stirs the coals gently, just enough to bring some air to them, and they respond by brightening slightly, a deeper orange, a faint increase in their warmth. He adds 2 pieces of coal from the small scuttle beside the stove, pieces he selected last night from the larger pile in the fuel store outside, medium pieces, not too large, because large pieces take too long to catch, and what is needed now is a quick, steady warmth to begin the day. He places them with care, not dropping them onto the coals, but setting them down gently, one against the other, so that the air can move between them. Then he closes the door and straightens up and waits. The coal takes a few minutes to catch. Thomas stands beside the stove with his hands loosely at his sides and waits, because there is nothing else to do while the fire decides what it will do, and patience with fire is something Thomas understood a long time ago. Through the window, the sky is very marginally lighter than it was. The sound of the sea is the same as it always is. After a while, he can hear the fire beginning inside the stove, a faint crackling, very soft. The sound of coal beginning to give up its heat, and through the small vent holes in the stove door, he can see a glow that is more active than before, more alive. He will leave it now. It will be warm in the room by the time he comes back from his first task of the morning, which is to check the lamp. He dresses in the dark, or nearly the dark. He does not light a candle for dressing, because he has dressed in this room so many times that his hands know where everything is without needing to see it. His wool trousers, heavy and dark, hanging on the peg beside the chest. His linen shirt, slightly stiff from being aired overnight in the cool room. His thick wool jumper, the one with a high neck, the one that smells of itself in the room and of something faintly of the sea, the way everything in this lighthouse smells faintly of the sea. His stockings, his heavy leather boots, which he pulls on sitting on the edge of the bed, lacing them with the same sequence of movements he has used every morning, the laces crossing and tightening in the same order, his fingers doing what they know how to do. He takes his oil lantern from the shelf by the door, a small lantern with a glass chimney and a brass body worn smooth from handling, and lights it from the coals in the stove, holding a thin strip of wood to the coals until it catches, and then holding the small flame to the wick, which takes it slowly, the flame establishing itself in a low, warm, steady burn. He turns the wick down just slightly to a comfortable height, not too bright, and fits the glass chimney over it and picks up the lantern by its handle and opens the door. The stairwell is cold. The stairs are stone, worn smooth in the center from decades of climbing feet. Not his feet alone, but the feet of all the keepers who came before him. The feet that wore these same smooth depressions into these same stones long before Thomas ever climbed them. He begins to climb, holding a lantern in one hand, his other hand trailing along the curved outer wall for balance, the steps rising in a slow spiral upward through the center of the lighthouse. The stairwell smells of stone and coal and lamp oil, a clean, mineral smell with that particular sharpness of whale oil that has been burned and has filled the air of the space, so thoroughly that the smell is no longer just in the air but in the walls themselves, in the stone, in the mortar, in every surface that is absorbed over the many years of the lamp burning above. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is simply the smell of this place, the smell of the lighthouse, the smell of the work. Thomas climbs slowly. There is no hurry. There is never any hurry on these stairs. He climbs the way he always climbs, one step at a time, his weight shifting from one foot to the other in a steady, unhurried rhythm, the lantern moving gently with each step, its light swaying slightly across the curved stone walls, making slow-moving shadows that rise and fall with his movement. He passes the door to the watchroom. He continues up. He reaches the lantern room. The lantern room is a glass-enclosed chamber at the very top of the lighthouse, circular, perhaps 8 feet across, with glass panels all around and the great lamp in its center, a complex arrangement of glass lenses and metal and the central flame, all of it slowly rotating on its mechanism, the lenses catching and bending and concentrating the light of the flame into a single bright beam that sweeps out through the glass and across the water. Even now, with dawn approaching, the lamp is burning, because the rule is that the lamp burns from dusk to dawn and does not stop, and dawn has not quite arrived. Thomas enters the lantern room and sets his lantern down on the small shelf beside the door and stands for a moment watching the lamp. It is turning. It is always turning. The mechanism is working correctly. The gear train ticking its low, steady tick, the weights descended partway toward the bottom of their travel, the rotation perfectly even, perfectly timed. He watches one full rotation without doing anything, simply observing, the way a keeper observes, with calm attention, with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what he is looking for, and is simply confirming that it is present. The wick needs trimming. He can see from the slight unevenness of the flame, a small, barely perceptible wavering on one side, that the wick is burned unevenly in the night and needs attention. This is normal. This is expected. The wick always needs trimming in the morning. He takes up the small pair of scissors kept in their leather holder beside the lamp access door and opens the access panel and reaches in carefully to the wick and trims it, small, precise snips, removing the charred edge, leaving the wick clean and even, the flame immediately steadying, evening out, burning with a cleaner, more symmetrical burn. He closes the access panel. He checks the oil reservoir, still sufficient, will last until the lamp is extinguished at dawn, which is soon. He checks the mechanism, the gearing, the cleanliness of the lens panels. Each one wiped clean last evening. Still clean, the glass perfectly clear, the light passing through without impediment. Everything is in order. Everything is as it should be. He stands by the glass and looks out at the sea. From up here, 60 feet above the headland, the view is everything. The gray water in every direction, the low gray sky, the dark rock of the headland below, the pale line of the distant coast of the north and south. There is a ship visible far to the east, several miles out, a dark shape against the gray water, moving very slowly south, its sails barely filled in the still morning air. Thomas observes it for a moment, noting its distance, its bearing, its slow progress. It is in no difficulty. It is simply there, as ships sometimes are, going quietly about its own business in the gray morning. He winds the mechanism. He takes the iron handle and begins to turn it, the long, slow, steady turning that raises the weights back toward the top of their travel. The handle is cold in his hands. The lantern room is very cold. The glass walls giving little insulation against the November air outside, and the turning requires effort, a sustained muscular effort that he has done so many times that his body knows exactly how to do it, finding the right pace, the right degree of force, settling into the rhythm of it. Turn, turn, turn. The weights rise. The mechanism is recharged. He counts the turns by habit, without thinking about the counting. The numbers simply accumulating in some background part of his mind, while the foreground of his attention is simply with the turning, with the handle, with the cold and the light and the sound of the gear train. When the weights are at the top, he stops. He releases the handle. The mechanism continues its steady ticking rotation, unchanged, uninterrupted. He stands for a moment, his breath visible in the cold air of the lantern room, and then he picks up his lantern and goes back down the stairs, down to the cold stairwell, one step at a time, the lantern swaying, the shadows moving on the walls, the smell of stone and oil, down past the watchroom door, down past the door to his bedroom, continuing down to the ground floor to the kitchen. The kitchen is the warmest room in the Lighthouse. It has its own iron stove, larger than the one in his bedroom, and it shares a chimney with the bedroom stove, and the combined warmth of both stoves, when they are burning, which they are now, makes the kitchen a comfortable place, a place where the cold of the stone walls and the stone floor is overcome by the warmth of the fire, where the air sits at a temperature that is simply pleasant rather than merely tolerable. Thomas sets his lantern on the kitchen table and goes to the stove. The kitchen stove has been burning all night on a bank fire. He always banks it at night, laying the coal carefully so that it will burn very low and very slowly through the dark hours, and still be alive in the morning, still able to be coaxed back to a full burn. He opens the stove door and looks at the coals, bright, alive, ready, and adds more coal and adjusts the vent, and closes the door, and the fire begins its morning work. The kettle is on the shelf beside the stove. It is a heavy iron kettle, black from years of heat, with a handle worn smooth by handling. Thomas fills it from the water barrel in the corner, dipping in the tin cup, pouring into the kettle, dipping and pouring until the kettle is perhaps 2/3 full, which is the right amount for one person's morning, and sets on the stove top, where it sits with a faint hiss of moisture on the hot iron surface, then goes quiet, sitting still, waiting to heat. While the kettle heats, Thomas goes about the small tasks of the morning kitchen. He takes the bread from its cloth on the shelf, a dark, dense loaf baked 3 days ago, still good, still sound, the crust very firm now and the inside becoming denser and drier as the days pass, which is simply what bread does and is not a problem. He cuts 2 slices from it with a long knife, the knife moving through the bread slowly, the crust requiring some effort. The crumbs fall into board in small, dark pieces. He sets the bread slices near the stove, not on the stove, but close enough that the warmth from the iron will gradually reach them and take the edge off their coolness. He finds a small crock of butter in the cool corner of the kitchen, butter that he bought in the village last week, plain and pale, slightly salted, already firm in the cold, and sets it on the table. He finds his knife and his cup and his plate, and sets them on the table beside the butter. The kettle is beginning to move, not yet boiling, far from boiling, but the water inside it is warmed enough that Thomas can hear a very faint, very low singing sound from within the metal, the first indication of warmth, the first sign that the process has begun. He does not stand over it. He does not watch it. He goes to the window, instead, and looks out. The kitchen window faces northwest, away from the sea on this side, toward the low, scrubby inland. The sky in this direction is the same overcast gray as everywhere else, but very slightly lighter now than it was when Thomas first woke. The gray has shifted, almost imperceptibly, towards something that could be called pale. Dawn is very close. In a little while he will go back up to the lantern room and extinguish the lamp, as he does every morning, as the sky becomes bright enough that the lamp's light is no longer needed by the ships on the water. He watches the window for a little while. Outside, the low stone walls of the kitchen garden are visible in the near dark, dark lines against the slightly lighter ground. The kale is barely visible, just dark shapes at the edge of the garden bed. There is no movement outside, no wind, no animal, no person. There is only the stillness of November morning, the gray of the sky, the very faint smell of the sea that enters even to the closed window, finding its way through every small gap in the stone and the frame. The kettle is singing more now, a low, continuous, slightly trembling sound. The sound of water that is warm but not yet at the boil, the sound of something approaching a transition it has not yet reached. Thomas listens to it without turning away from the window. He knows the sound of his kettle very well. He knows the sequence of sound it makes, from the first faint singing, to the fuller, more continuous sound it is making now, to the low rushing sound of near boiling, to the strong, insistent sound of the full boil with its rattling lid. He is at the second stage now. There is time. He thinks of nothing in particular while he stands at the window. Or rather, thoughts move through him the way thoughts move through a person who is very accustomed to their own company, gently, without urgency, without being chased or examined. He thinks briefly of the ship he saw from the lantern room, and then the thought passes. He notices the color of the sky in the northwest, which is perhaps the very faintest shade lighter than it was a minute ago, and that is all. The kettle reaches its boil. The sound changes, a rushing, bubbling, slightly violent sound, the lid beginning to rattle, and Thomas turns from the window and goes to the stove. He wraps a cloth around the handle and lifts the kettle and pours a small amount of boiling water into his cup, which has already measured a portion of dried tea leaves into, and then he sets the kettle back on the stove and wraps his hands around the cup and breathes in the steam. The steam rises from the cup in a slow, curling column, carrying the smell of the tea, a plain, simple smell, dark and slightly astringent, the smell of something familiar. Thomas holds the cup and does not drink from it yet, because it is too hot, and he waits while the tea steeps and the steam rises and the kitchen is warm and the morning continues its slow arrival outside the window. Now let yourself settle a little more deeply. Your body is heavy and still. Your breathing is slow and even. The sounds of the kitchen are far away. The kettle, the fire, the distant sound of the sea, all of it softening, becoming quieter, becoming the kind of sound that drifts past you without asking for any attention at all. Thomas drinks his tea slowly. He sits at the kitchen table with the cup in both hands, the warmth of the cup passing into his palms, and he drinks in small sips, each one very small, each one very slow. The tea warm enough to feel its warmth all the way down, a slow spreading of warmth from the throat down into the chest. He eats his bread with butter, taking small bites, chewing slowly, the dense rye bread requiring unhurried chewing, the butter cold and slightly resistant at first, and then yielding. He eats without hurry. He does not think about eating. He simply eats. The sky outside the kitchen window is lighter now. The gray has shifted to a paler gray. Not quite white, not quite light, but unmistakably closer to morning than it was. Thomas finishes his second slice of bread and drinks the last of his tea and sets the cup down and wipes his hands on the cloth and stands. It is time to extinguish the lamp. Back up the stairs. The stairwell is still cold, as it always is, the stone holding the night cold in its deep thickness. Up past the bedroom, up past the watchroom, up to the lantern room. The lamp is still turning, still burning. The beam sweeping steadily out across the water that is now gray light rather than gray dark. The beam less vivid against the lightening sky, but still there, still functioning, still doing its work. Thomas opens the access panel and reaches in and turns down the wick, slowly, carefully, watching the flame diminish, becoming smaller, smaller, a small bright point, and then the wick is fully down and the flame is gone, and the lantern room is filled with the cool gray light of the early morning sky, coming to the glass panels on all sides, the sea visible in every direction in the pale dawn, and the lighthouse lamp is still. The lamp is still. The mechanism continues its rotation for a moment from its own momentum, turning slowly, more slowly, and then stopping. The silence of the stop mechanism is a different kind of silence than the silence of the working mechanism, a silence that has something slightly different in it, a cessation rather than a continuation. But the silence of sea and the morning fills in immediately, and the room is simply quiet in a way that it is always quiet when the lamp is out and the day has begun. Thomas stands in the lantern room and looks out at the sea for a moment. The ship he saw earlier is still there, further south now, smaller, barely distinguishable from the gray of the water at this distance. The sea is calm, long, low swells moving through it, their surfaces catching the flat gray morning light in a faint, diffuse shimmer. The horizon is still indistinct, sky and water blending at their meeting line in a soft, seamless gray. He begins to clean the lens panels. This is his morning work in the lantern room, a careful, methodical cleaning of each glass panel, using a soft cloth and a small amount of cleaning solution, wiping each panel in slow, circular motions, removing the soot and moisture of the night's burning, leaving the glass clear and ready for the next night. He works from left to right around the lamp, one panel at a time, taking his time with each one, the cloth moving in steady circles, the glass clearing under his hand, the morning light coming to the clean panels more clearly than through the unclean ones, marking his progress around the lamp. The cleaning takes perhaps 30 minutes. It is quiet work, repetitive work, work that requires attention but not thought, the hands moving in their practice pattern while the mind is free to go wherever it goes, which is usually nowhere very specific, simply resting in the warmth of its own inactivity. The lantern room grows gradually brighter as the morning advances and the sky continues its slow lightening, and by the time Thomas finishes the last panel and folds his cloth and sets it back on its shelf, the room is filled with the full gray light of November morning, and the sea outside is fully visible in all its calm, gray, immense ordinariness. He descends the stairs for the second time this morning and goes back to the kitchen and puts more coal on the stove and puts the kettle on again, because the morning is cold and the work of cleaning the lamp has made him want another cup of tea. He moves through the kitchen slowly, doing what needs doing. The kettle on the stove, the cup rinsed from before and set out again, the tea measured, the small tasks done in their small sequence. While he waits for the kettle, he goes to the fuel store to bring in more coal for the day. The fuel store is the small outbuilding closest to the lighthouse door, connected to it by a covered passage of low stone, and it is cold in there. Colder even than outside, the stone walls holding the damp coal with great efficiency. The coal is in a large bin against the far wall, dark and heavy, and faintly gleaming in the gray light from the small high window. Thomas scoops coal into the bucket with a short-handled iron scoop. The sound of it, the scrape and clatter coal against iron, filling the small space with a sharp, gritty sound. And when the bucket is full, he carries it back to the passage and into the kitchen and sets it beside the stove. The kettle is not boiling yet. He washes his hands and a small amount of water poured into the wash basin on the shelf by the door, the water cold, the soap a plain gray block, the washing brief and functional, and dries them on the cloth and goes to the window again. Outside, the morning has fully arrived, insofar as November mornings fully arrive, which is to say that the sky is as light as it will likely get today, a flat even gray without gradation or variety, the light coming from everywhere at once rather than from any particular direction. The kitchen garden is visible now. The dark soil, the kale standing in its small corner, the low stone walls with a faint damp darkness to them from the overnight moisture. Beyond the garden wall, the rough grass of the headland stretches to the edge, where the land ends and the long view of the sea begins. A seagull lands on the top of the garden wall. Thomas watches it from a window. It is a large gull, gray and white, its feathers very smooth and compact in the still air, its eye a bright, cold yellow. It stands on the wall for a moment, looking around with the quick, alert movements of its head that gulls always make. Left, right, down, up, and then it settles and is still, and simply stands there on the wall with its feet gripping the cold stone, looking out at nothing in particular. Thomas watches the gull without any particular feeling about it. It is a gull. Gulls come to this wall and to the headland frequently, and they make their sounds over the sea, and they are part of the texture of this place the same way the sound of the sea is part of it, the same way the gray of the sky is part of it. This gull is standing quietly on the wall, which is a thing gulls sometimes do, and Thomas watches it for a little while, and then looks away. The kettle is boiling. He makes his second cup of tea in the same way he made the first, the same careful pour, the same measured leaves, the same wrapping of both hands around the warm cup. He takes the cup to the chair beside the kitchen stove and sits down in it. The chair is an old wooden armchair with a flat cushion on the seat, the cushion covered in a dark wool fabric that is worn thin in its center. The chair is warm from its proximity to the stove, and Thomas settles into it with the particular settling of a person taking a familiar seat in a familiar place, the body fitting itself to the known shape of the chair without any conscious adjustment. He drinks his tea. He is not thinking about anything. The stove ticks softly as the metal expands in the heat. The sea can be heard distantly through the walls. The gull on the garden wall calls once, a short, flat sound, and is silent again. Let the morning drift around you now like the gray sea drifts around the headland, slowly, without urgency, without any destination. Your body is so heavy and so still. Your breathing is so slow and so even. The warmth of Thomas's kitchen is far away, but it is there, a distant, soft warmth, like the memory of warmth, like the feeling of warmth on the surface of a dream. Thomas finishes his tea. He sets the cup on the small table beside the chair and folds his hands in his lap and sits for a little while longer, simply sitting, the way he sometimes does in the morning after a second cup of tea, before the day's work begins in earnest. The work of the day will be ordinary work, the maintenance of the lighthouse, the care of the horse, the tending of the kitchen garden, in what small way it requires tending in November, the writing of the daily log entry, the preparation of food. None of it is urgent. All of it will be done in its own time, in its own sequence, without hurry. For now he sits. The stove is warm. The kitchen is warm. The gray morning is outside the window, steady and unchanging, the kind of morning that seems as though it could last all day and probably will. The sea is there, the same as always, its low sound filling the space between all other sounds. Thomas looks at the stove. The door of the stove has a small vent hole near the bottom, and through this hole a faint orange glow is visible. The interior of the stove, the burning coal, the fire at the center of this quiet morning. He watches it without particular attention, the glow steady and warm, doing what fire does, which is simply to burn, simply to give off warmth, simply to continue as long as there's fuel and air, which it does and will, and always has in this kitchen on this headland on mornings like this one. After a while, Thomas rises from the chair and puts on his outer coat and his heavy wool cap and his gloves and goes outside. The outer coat is long and dark, made of a thick, tightly woven wool that sheds water reasonably well, with large buttons of bone down the front and a collar that can be turned up against the wind. This morning there is almost no wind, so the collar stays down and the coat is simply warm rather than defensive. Outside, the air is cold on his face, a clean, salt-edged cold, the particular cold of the sea coast in November, which has a sharpness to it that indoor cold does not have, a freshness that comes from the sea and the open sky and the absence of walls. Thomas breathes it in and out once, deeply, and then begins his morning rounds. The morning rounds are a slow circuit of the lighthouse and its outbuildings, checking the exterior of the tower for any damage or unusual condition, checking the fuel store, checking the stable where the horse is kept, checking the small tool store. It is not a quick circuit. Thomas moves at his usual pace, which is unhurried, and he stops at each building to examine what needs examining, not rushing past, not skipping anything, simply moving from one thing to the next in the order that they present themselves in the circuit. The exterior of the tower is unchanged, as it almost always is. He walks around its base slowly, looking up at the stone, the mortar joints, the iron fixtures at the base of the lantern room, the glass panels visible above. The stone is dark with moisture from the night, almost black in places, and very cold to the touch when he puts his hand briefly against the wall. All is expected, all as it always is. The fuel store is adequately stocked. He notes the level of the coal, lower than he would like it to be, as it always is at this point in the season. The deliveries from the mainland not always arriving on the expected schedule. But there is enough for now, enough for several more days at the current rate of use. And he notes this without worry, because worry about what is not yet a problem is not something Thomas does. The stable is warm in the way that stables are warm, with the warmth of the horse, a large, pale gray mare named Patience, who stands at her stall and turns her head to look at Thomas as he comes into the low door. Her eyes are large and dark and entirely calm, and she regards him with the mild, unhurried attention of an animal that is entirely comfortable in its surroundings and requires nothing urgent. Thomas goes to her and puts his hand on her neck, and she stands still under it, her breathing slow and even, the warmth of her rising through his gloved hand. He checks her water, full. She has not drunk much in the night, and her hay, which is nearly gone, and he forks more hay from the pile in the corner of the stable into her rack, the fork moving in slow, even strokes, the hay falling softly. Patience pulls a mouthful from the rack immediately and begins to chew with the same steady, entirely purposeful expression that horses have when they're eating, her jaw moving in its regular lateral motion, her eyes half closed. Thomas brushes her briefly, not the full grooming that he does in mornings, just a few slow strokes with the body brush along her back and sides, the brush moving in the direction of the coat, the sound of a soft, slightly raspy sound, the coat smoothing slightly under each stroke. Patience does not move during this. She continues to eat her hay, occasionally shifting her weight from one back foot to the other in a slow, small movement that is entirely natural and requires no response from Thomas. He finishes the brushing and sets the brush back on its shelf and gives Patience one final pat on the neck, a solid, gentle pat, 2 or 3 times, and she continues her hay without looking at him, and he goes back outside. The morning is still gray and still. He has been outside perhaps 20 minutes, and the cold has come into his hands and his face and the tips of his ears, and the kitchen is warm and waiting, and the day's work is beginning to arrange itself before him in its ordinary sequence. Back inside, he removes his coat and cap and hangs them on the pegs near the door and goes to the kitchen stove and puts his hands near it, feeling the warmth return to his palms and fingers gradually, a slow, prickling return of sensation. The stove is burning well. The kitchen is warm. He puts the kettle on for the 3rd time this morning. Not because he needs tea exactly, but because a kettle on the stove is a comfortable thing, a warm sound, the beginning of something that does not need to be a specific something, just a warm presence in a room. He takes out the daily log from the shelf beside the kitchen window, a large, flat, hard-covered book with thick cream-colored pages, each page dated in his careful, plain handwriting. Each entry the same in its structure, because the days are similar in their structure. He opens it to today's page, which is blank, and picks up his pen and dips in the small ink bottle on the shelf, and begins to write. The log entry is brief. The date, the weather, overcast, calm, no wind, moderate cold. The state of the sea, slight swell from the southwest, visibility fair. The lamp, burned all night without interruption, wick trimmed at dawn, lenses cleaned, mechanism wound twice in the night, once at dawn. The fuel level, noted, any vessels observed, 1, heading south, distant, no difficulty observed. He writes all of this in the same plain, unhurried handwriting, the pen moving slowly across the paper, each letter formed carefully, the words arranged in their customary order, nothing left out and nothing added that is not necessary. When the log entry is complete, he puts the pen down and closes the book and replaces it on the shelf. The kettle is beginning to sing. He makes his tea and sits down at the table with the log closed in front of him and the tea in his hands, and the morning continues. The middle part of the morning, the hours between the completion of the morning rounds and the preparation of the midday meal, belongs to whatever maintenance work is most pressing. Today, the most pressing work is the oil. The lamp burns whale oil, and the oil must be transferred from the large storage barrels in the fuel store to the smaller cans that Thomas carries up the stairs to refill the lamp's reservoir, and this transfer must be done carefully, because oil spilled on stone is a problem, and the oil is heavy in its barrels and must be moved with the proper equipment. Thomas does this work slowly and carefully. He goes to the fuel store with the transfer equipment, a hand pump with a length of hose, the smaller cans arranged on the floor beside the large barrel, and he works the pump with steady, even strokes, the oil moving to the hose in a slow, thick, dark stream, filling the cans one at a time. The pump makes a slow, rhythmic sound, a push and a pull, a push and pull, and the oil fills the cans with a low, liquid sound, a thick, slightly viscous sound that is different from the sound of water. When the cans are filled, he seals them carefully and carries them to the base of the Lighthouse stairs and sets them in a row. He will carry them up one at a time later, when he goes to prepare the lamp for tonight's lighting. For now, they sit in their row at the base of the stairs, dark and heavy, ready. Back in the kitchen, he sits again. He has worked for perhaps 2 hours since breakfast, and there is a comfortable tiredness in his arms and shoulders, not exhaustion, just a mild, pleasant tiredness of physical work done steadily. The kind of tiredness that is different from the tiredness of being unwell, the kind that says a body has been useful and can now rest for a little while. Let yourself feel that tiredness in your own body now, that mild, comfortable, entirely pleasant heaviness that comes from having been in the world all day, from having moved through time and done the things the day required. Your body has earned its rest. It knows how to rest. It has been resting like this every night of your life, and it will rest like this tonight, easily, completely, giving itself over to sleep the way Thomas gives himself over to his chair beside the stove, simply settling in, simply allowing. Thomas prepares his midday meal in the kitchen, moving between the stove and the table and the shelf with the same quiet efficiency he brings to all his tasks. The meal is a simple broth, water and dried peas and a piece of salt pork and some of the kale from the garden, cut into pieces. Simmer together in the pot until the peas are soft and the pork has given up its flavor to the water and the broth is thick and dark and savory. He has been making this broth in various forms every few days for as long as he's been here, and he makes it now without consulting anything, without measuring anything, simply doing what he knows. The pot hangs over fire on the iron hook. The broth simmers, a low, continuous, very soft bubbling, the surface of the broth moving in slow, gentle pulses, the steam rising from in a column that bends slightly toward the chimney. Thomas checks it occasionally, stirring once with a long spoon, looking at the color, tasting a small amount from the tip of the spoon. Not ready yet. He puts the spoon down and goes to sit by the window. Outside, the sea is visible from this window in a narrow strip between the garden wall and the edge of the headland. A wedge of gray water, moving in its slow, continuous way, the long swells passing to the narrow frame of view one after another, each one indistinguishable from the last, each one simply the sea being the sea. Thomas watches the sea through the narrow window for a long time. He is not thinking about anything in particular. He is not troubled. He is simply watching the sea, which is a thing he has done many thousands of times, and which requires nothing of him and gives him nothing specific in return except the simple experience of watching the sea, which is enough. The broth is ready. He brings the pot to the table and ladles a large portion into his bowl, a wide, deep bowl of plain earthenware, slightly chipped at the rim, very familiar in its weight and texture, and sets the bowl before him and sits down. The steam from the broth rises around his face. He can smell it, the salt pork, the peas, the slight earthiness of the kale, and he picks up a spoon and begins to eat. He eats slowly. The broth is hot and must be taken in small, careful spoonfuls, blowing gently across the surface of each spoonful before bringing it to his lips. The peas are soft now, soft enough to be almost a part of the liquid rather than separate from it, their skins just barely intact, yielding completely at the gentlest pressure. The pork has given up almost all of its substance to the broth, and what remains is a small piece of yielding, very soft meat with almost no resistance. The kale is dark and soft and slightly silky, the bitterness of it reduced by the long cooking. The flavor of it now simply a dark note in the overall flavor of the broth. He eats all of it. He cuts 2 more pieces of bread and uses them to wipe the bowl clean at the end, pressing them against the inside of the bowl and drawing them through the last traces of the broth. He eats the bread. He pushes the bowl aside and sits for a moment with his hands in his lap and his eyes not particularly focused on anything. After eating, the afternoon stretches out before Thomas in his familiar way, a long, gray, quiet November afternoon, unhurried, requiring nothing dramatic, asking only for steady continuation of the ordinary tasks that keep the lighthouse running and the keeper in good order. He washes his bowl and his spoon and sets them on the shelf to dry. He adds coal to both stoves. He checks the lamp oil cans he filled this morning and decides to carry 2 of them up the stairs now rather than later. Better to do it now, in the full afternoon, than in the dimming light before the lamp lighting. He carries the cans up one at a time, moving slowly up the long spiral stairs, the can heavy in one hand, the other hand on the wall for balance. The stairwell cold is always, the smell of oil and stone is always, in the lantern room. He fills the oil reservoir through the small aperture in its side. A slow, careful process, the oil moving from the can to the reservoir in a thin, dark stream, filling the reservoir to the correct level, not over, not under. He wipes the lip of the aperture with a cloth and replaces the cap and checks the level through the small glass sight on the side of the reservoir. Good. Full. Ready for tonight. He goes back down. He carries the second can up. Fills, wipes, checks. Goes back down. The stairwell is the same on every ascent and descent. The same cold, the same smell, the same slow spiral. The same worn, smooth stone of each step. The same slight sound as boots on the stone. The same distant sound of the sea getting slightly louder as he goes up and slightly quieter as he comes down. Back in the kitchen, he sits. The afternoon has not progressed very far. There is still a long, slow time between now and the lamp lighting, which will happen at dusk, which today will be around 4 in the afternoon, because it is November and the days are short. He has perhaps 2 hours. He will spend them in the kitchen, mostly. He will do some small repair work. There is a length of rope in need of splicing, a task he has been meaning to do for several days. And he will sit by the stove, and he'll perhaps read for a while, and the afternoon will pass the way afternoons pass here, gently, without hurry, into the early dark. The rope splicing takes a quiet, concentrated hour. He sits at the kitchen table with the rope in his hands, working the fibers apart and back together with his fingers and a small metal tool. The work requiring close attention but no particular thought. His hands doing what they know how to do while his eyes follow the progress of the splice. And his mind rests in that comfortable, nearly empty place that comes from doing work that the hands know well. The rope is old manila, worn soft from use, its fibers separating easily under his hands. The smell of a clean, slightly salty, slightly earthy smell. The splice he is making is a simple eye splice, a loop at the end of the rope, the end of the rope tucked back into itself and woven through an irregular pattern. Each tuck going over one strand and under the next, around and around, the splice building up gradually, the loop becoming firm and secure with each additional tuck. He has made thousands of splices. He will make thousands more. Each one is the same as the last in its method and its result, and there is nothing to figure out, nothing to decide, just the regular motion of the hands and the regular building of the splice. When it is done, he pulls the splice firm between his hands, feeling the loop tighten, feeling the construction settle into its final form, and runs his thumb over the finished surface, which is smooth and even and correct. He sets the rope down and looks at the splice for a moment, not admiringly exactly, but with the simple satisfaction of something finished, something done correctly, something that will do its job without any further attention. He puts the rope on the shelf where it belongs and brushes the small bits of rope fiber off the table and goes to the window. The afternoon is advancing. The gray of the sky has a slightly different quality to it now. Still overcast, still flat, but with a hint of something darker beginning in the northwest. A marginally deeper gray that suggests that the late afternoon is underway, that the day is beginning its quiet turn toward evening. He makes his afternoon tea. This is the third tea of the day or the fourth, depending on how you count, and it is the one he most looks forward to in the afternoons. Not because there is anything different about it, because there is nothing different about it, but because it marks the middle of the afternoon, the point from which the rest of the day is a gradual descent toward a lamp lighting and the supper in the evening. And there is a comfort in that marking, in knowing where you are in the day. He sits with the tea in the chair by the stove and reads. The book he is reading is a natural history, a description of the flora and fauna of the British Isles, written in plain, informative prose, with detailed descriptions of various plants and animals and their habits and habitats. It is not an exciting book. It is not meant to be an exciting book. It is a book meant to inform, and it does so in a methodical, unhurried way, one subject following another in a reasonable order, each subject given its appropriate amount of space. Thomas reads a few pages about sedge grasses and their distribution along the English coastline, and then a few pages about the various species of gull, which he reads with mild interest given his daily proximity to gulls, and then a few pages about the growth habits of sea purslin, and then he sets the book down and closes his eyes. He does not sleep. He simply rests with his eyes closed, the book in his lap, the fire warm before him, the tea finished and the cup on the table. He rests the way he has learned to rest in the afternoons. Completely, without struggle, without trying to sleep or trying not to sleep, simply being still with his eyes closed for however long this moment lasts. The stove ticks softly. The sea breathes its low, continuous breath below the headland. Somewhere outside, the gull calls once, its voice flat and distant, and then is silent. Let yourself rest now the way Thomas rests. Let your eyes be closed and let your body be completely still, and let whatever is left of your thinking mind simply drift, undirected, unattached, moving where it wants to move without you having to follow or manage or attend to it. It does not need your attention. Nothing does right now. There's only the warmth and the dark behind your eyes and the slow and easy rhythm of your breathing, which continues without any effort from you. In and out, the same as it has always been, the same as it always will be. The afternoon passes. The light outside the kitchen window dims very gradually, the gray of the sky deepening by degrees that are too small to see if you are watching, but that add up, over the course of an hour, to a clear difference between the light of mid-afternoon and the light of late afternoon. Thomas is aware of this dimming in the way he is always aware of it, Not by looking directly at the sky, but by the quality of the light on the kitchen table, on the walls, on the surface of everything in the room, which grows slightly less clear, slightly more shadowed, as the afternoon advances. At a certain point, he rises from his chair and puts his coat on and goes out to the fuel store one more time to bring in the last load of coal for the day. The air outside is colder now, noticeably colder than it was in the morning. The November afternoon doing what November afternoons do, pulling the temperature down toward the evening. His breath is very visible now. Each exhalation a small, brief cloud in the cold air. He fills the bucket quickly and goes back inside. He feeds both stoves. The kitchen stove receives a generous addition of coal, built up for the evening's warmth. The bedroom stove receives a smaller addition, enough to keep the chill off through the dinner hour, so that the room will be comfortable when he goes up to bed. He closes both stove doors and stands in the kitchen and listens. It is nearly time to light the lamp. The sky outside is no longer gray, but a darker version of gray. The gray of late afternoon in November, which is very close to the gray of early dusk. In 30 minutes, perhaps 40, the light will have thinned enough that the lamp needs to be burning. Thomas prepares the lamp in the way he always prepares it. He carries the last of oil up the stairs of the lantern room. The stairwell dimmer now, his lantern necessary again, and he checks the reservoir level one more time, and trims the wick one more time, and checks the gear train of the mechanism, and winds the weights to the top. He does all of this with the same unhurried thoroughness he brings to all his lamp work, checking each element in its sequence, leaving nothing to chance or assumption. When everything is ready, he stands beside the lamp with the long lighting taper in his hand, a thin, wax-coated length of twisted cotton, lit from his lantern, and holds the small flame to the lamp's wick. The wick takes the flame slowly, as it always does, the oil rising through the fibers of the wick to feed the flame establishing itself gradually. First a small, uncertain flicker, then a more confident burn, then the full, steady flame of the burning lamp, bright and clear and warm in the center of the lens assembly. He steps back. He releases the brake on the mechanism. The lamp begins to turn. Slowly, steadily, the gear train taking up its work, the weights beginning their long, slow descent to the center of the lighthouse, the lens assembly rotating on its bearing with a sound so faint it is barely a sound, a whisper of motion, a ghost of movement. The beam sweeps out to the glass panels and across the darkening water, sweeping, sweeping, its slow arc beginning its night's work. Thomas watches the lamp complete one full rotation, then two. The rotation is correct. The flame is correct. The mechanism is correct. He picks up his lantern and goes back down the stairs. The evening is the quietest part of the day in the lighthouse. The lamp is lit and turning and requires nothing from Thomas for several hours, only the winding, which he does twice in the night, once in the middle of the evening and once after midnight. Between the windings, the time is his own, and he spends in the kitchen in the warmth, eating his supper and reading and sitting quietly and eventually sleeping. Supper is simpler than dinner. Bread and cheese and a piece of cold saltfish from the larder, eaten at the kitchen table with another cup of tea, the whole meal taking perhaps 20 minutes of unhurried eating. He eats the fish first. It has a strong, sharp, saltwater flavor, very familiar, very simple, and then the cheese, which is a hard, slightly crumbly, pale yellow cheese from the mainland, plain and good, and then the bread, and then he sits with his tea. Outside, the night has settled completely. The window is dark now, showing only Thomas's vague reflection in glass, and the lamp beam sweeps past outside at its 30-second intervals. A brief brightening in the reflection, just a moment's increase in the light, and then the beam has swept on, and the window is dark again, and then in 30 seconds it comes again. Thomas watches this from where he sits at the table. The regular brightening and dimming of his own reflection, the slow, patient count of 30 seconds between each pass of the beam, which he does not actually count but simply experiences as a rhythm, a pulse, a steady marker of time. It is an ordinary evening in an ordinary life in an ordinary year in a world that contains this small lighthouse on this small headland and the sea around it and the lamp burning above it and the man sitting in the kitchen below. And that is everything, and it is entirely sufficient, and it is very good. Let the evening settle around you now the way it settles around the lighthouse. Completely, quietly, with a kind of finality, that is also a kind of peace. The day is done. The lamp is burning. There is nothing left to do tonight that is not simply existing here, in the warmth and the quiet, in the deep and ordinary comfort of a place that is known and safe and still. Thomas reads for a while in the evening. He returns to his natural history. Sitting in his chair beside the stove, the book open in his lap, the lantern on a table nearby, giving a warm yellow light. He reads about the tidal patterns of the English coast, how the tide are influenced by the position of the moon, how the spring tides and the neap tides alternate through the lunar month, how the fishermen of the coastal villages have always known the tides as intimately as they know their own hands. He reads this with the mild, comfortable interest of someone who knows the subject from living near it, who recognizes in the written description the same forces he observes every day from a headland. After the reading, he sits quietly for a while. The fire is warm. The evening is deep. The lamp is doing its work above him, and the mechanism is ticking its faint tick, and the sea is there, always there. It sounds so familiar now that it enters a room like a friend enters a room. Noticed briefly, and then simply present, requiring nothing. He goes up, wants to wind the weights. The stairwell in the evening is the same as the stairwell in the morning, except darker and colder, and with the smell of the burning lamp strong in the air as he approaches the top. He wins steadily, the handle turning in the same rhythm as always, the weights rising, the mechanism recharged. He checks the flame, which is burning correctly, and the wick, which does not yet need trimming, and the glass panels, which are clean. He goes back down. The night deepens. Thomas sits in his kitchen chair, and his eyes begin to grow heavy in the way eyes do when the day is truly done and the body knows it is time. He does not fight this. There is nothing to fight. He lets his eyes be heavy, lets them close and open and close again, lets the warmth of the stove and the familiar smell of the kitchen and the distant, rhythmic, deeply familiar sound of the sea work their slow alchemy on his wakefulness. He goes to bed at his usual hour, which is perhaps 9 or 10 in the evening, not late, because the night will be broken by the midnight winding, and he always wakes for that without difficulty, having done it so many times that his body has built the waking into its own sleep cycle. He banks the kitchen stove for the night, laying the coal carefully in its slow-burning configuration, and checks the bedroom stove, which is burning well, and goes up the stairs to his room. He undresses in the dark room, the stove warm in the corner, the window showing the occasional sweep of the lamp beam from above, a brief, moving brightness every 30 seconds, passing through the gap in the shutter, crossing the ceiling and the wall in a slow, pale arc. He has fallen asleep to this light every night for years. It is as familiar as anything, more familiar, perhaps, than anything else. He lies down on his narrow bed. He pulls the wool blanket over himself, heavy, warm, pressing down gently. He puts his arms at his sides. He closes his eyes. The lamp turns above him. The sea moves below him. The stove holds its warmth in the corner. And the night settles around the lighthouse the way it always does. Completely, softly, without any edge or urgency. Simply night. Simply dark. Simply the continuation of the world in its nighttime form. Now, let everything go quiet. Let the lighthouse go quiet. Let the village go quiet. Let the sea go quiet. Not silent. It is never silent, but quiet. Its sound becoming simply the sound of the world breathing. In and out, slow and even, the same breath it has always breathed. The same breath it will always breathe. You are so still. Your body is so heavy, so warm, so completely at rest. There is nothing pulling at you. There is nothing asking for your attention. There is only this moment and the darkness behind your eyes and the slow, untroubled rhythm of your breathing, which is happening all by itself, the way it always has, the way the sea moves all by itself, the way the lamp turns all by itself. Everything simply continuing in its own quiet, unhurried way. The lamp turns. The weights descend. The beam sweeps across the dark water. Thomas sleeps. The coals in the stove glow softly. The horse in the stable breathes slowly. The November night is cold and clear and entirely still. The stars, where the clouds have thinned, are very bright and very far away, burning their ancient, patient fires above the sea and the lighthouse and the sleeping man inside it, above everything, indifferent and beautiful and wholly unhurried, as they have always been and will always be. The lighthouse stands. The lamp turns, the sea breathes, and you rest. You rest. You rest. Completely, quietly, still,